Meng Haoran, in the twilight of the year, I return to the south. I give up petitioning the palace towers in the north. I return to my poor cottage in the hills of the south. Saying I had no talent, the shining ruler cast me aside. My illnesses are many, my friends scattered and few. White hair makes plain my passing years. Green sunniness heralds the coming spring. Depressed and brooding, I cannot sleep. The moon shines through pines, but my window is empty. So here we have a poem by Meng Haoran. This is the fourth of his poems included in this section of a pentasyllabic regulated verse. Now, the topic of this poem is, I would say the main topic is failure at the examinations. As you know, Meng Haoran is a poet that is famous, from what we've said about him in previous poems, for being an exemplar of the gentleman scholar who rejects or contents himself with living the retired life and not serving in office. In this poem, though, the tone of not being successful in the examinations and not being recognized and not being able to serve in office is quite bitter. It is clear that Meng Haoran, at least if we take this poem at its word, wanted to serve in office and is really disappointed at not being able to do so. So the main topic, and the main idea in this poem, as I said, is failure in achieving a government position and the bitterness and the depressive mind state that generates or that goes along with this failure. There is also an element of retirement, but as I said, because the main thrust of the poem is lamenting the failure in the examinations and the lack of recognition, the lack of friends, the aging, the tone is so generally negative that, there is very little space for any positive evaluation of living the retired life, which, in the first couplet could not be completely impossible to imagine as the main thread that the poem was going to develop, but it's very quickly denied in the rest of the poem. We've encountered other poems, not by Meng Haoran, but we've encountered poems, for example, by Du Fu, where he also basically says the same thing as this poem says, like, I haven't achieved an important position, I am old and weak, I have no friends, I'm a failure. But this is the first take on it by Meng Haoran that I've seen. And again, as I say, it makes a contrast between his persona as a person who applauds and invites the retired life. Again, as I've just said, I'll repeat it again. If we take this poem at face value, Meng Haoran was everything but satisfied with not having become a scholar official. Anyway, for all scholar officials, there's always this tension between the desire to serve and the desire to retire and live a peaceful, quiet life with intellectual and social friends and companionship. Anyway, as usual, let's analyze the poem couplet by couplet. First couplet. I give up petitioning the palace towers in the north. I return to my poor cottage in the hills of the south. Remember, in a regulated poem, the first couplet does not have to be parallelistic, but it quite frequently is. And in this case, we see very clearly the parallelism. Yeah, give up, return. Yeah, palace, cottage, towers in the north, hills of the south. So first couplet is very parallelistic. And, it thrusts us right into the topic. It says, I'm tired of petitioning for a position at the court. I'm going back to my humble cottage in my homeland. Meng Haoran was a southerner. That is basically from the region. There were different souths in the Chinese Empire, but he came from the traditional region of Chu, the Yangtze Middle River Valley. And he was part of a southern culture that, was slightly mm, opposed in many aspects to North China and its culture. They had had a different political evolution as independent areas, the North and the South, for centuries. And, other thinkers tend to emphasize that the North is more communal and traditional and Confucian, and the South is more Taoistic and more creative and inspirational. Anyway, big contrast. I renounce the powers, I renounce the towers, I renounce the palace life, I renounce the North. I go back to my roots, I go back to the South, I go back to the simple life of my poor cottage in the hills. Second couplet. Saying I had no talent, the shining ruler cast me aside. My illnesses are many, my friends scattered and few. So this couplet and the third one feel a little bit like a cahier de doléances. There's a list of complaints and of frustrations. So why is he going south? Why was Meng Haoran unsuccessful at his worldly ambitions? Well, as I said, these two couplets explain it. The one we have just read basically mentions three ideas. So first of all, the ruler has not appreciated me. Shining ruler Ming Huang was one of the nicknames for Emperor Xuanzong, who was for the most part a patron of writers and poets. But for one reason or other, he didn't take a liking to Meng Haoran, and he didn't give him any positions. So the shining ruler has cast me aside. The emperor does not see any talent in me. I have a lot of illnesses. I'm sick, and I don't have many friends. So both social reasons and personal reasons seem to contribute or seem to be Meng Haoran's explanation for his failure. The next couplet also continues with this vein. White hair makes plain my passing years. Green sunniness heralds the coming spring. So the third couplet adds another element. You could say, I'm getting old as well. So it's no point in he is really giving the justification for what has happened in the first couplet, for his renunciation at continuing to try luck at court. So he says, the emperor has clearly not appreciated my talents. I don't have friends, I'm sick, and I'm old. So even if I wanted to try, there aren't that many years left for me to keep pushing to get power and office. But the third couplet is more interesting because the images it plays before our eyes are images of time with a contrast, which we've encountered in many other Chinese poems. The idea that nature renews itself, but humans do not. So for humans, aging is a tragedy because once we age and die, there is no coming back. Whereas for nature, the cycle of aging is not necessarily bad because nature is cyclical. So the tree that loses its leaves this autumn will be full of flowers and leaves next spring. The person who dies this autumn will not flower again next spring. So white hair makes plain Meng Haoran's passing years. On the contrary, and opposed to this, green sunniness heralds the coming spring. A new spring is coming with its flourishing, but I won't be enjoying this new spring. I won't be enjoying it because I'm old, and I won't be enjoying it because I cannot renew myself and strive again for success and position. Finally, the last couplet ends in a quite bleak and somber mood, and it takes an element from the common sub-theme of wakefulness at night, of poets not being able to sleep at night because of their preoccupations and frustrations. Depressed and brooding, I cannot sleep. The moon shines through pines, but my window is empty. So the poet, planning on going home, or already having started on his way home, or already having reached his humble abode, cannot sleep. He is brooding on all these things, on his failure at the examinations and at achieving government power, at his lack of friends, lack of recognition, old age, illnesses, general misery. And he looks out into nature. It's a nice moonlight. It's a nice night with the moon shining through pines, spring moon. He says, but my window is empty. Now this is a bit ambiguous. I don't quite understand this image. So what does it mean that his window is empty? Well, from what I read in another translation of this poem, the empty window is meant to represent the empty heart, the emptiness and frustration in the bosom of Meng Haoran. So the empty window is meant to stand for Meng Haoran himself, who is an empty husk, a frustrated and unsuccessful figure. His window is empty. The moon doesn't shine through the window, it shines through the pines. It could be. Perhaps there are other interpretations, but I think that one matches well with the generally bleak and pessimistic tone of the poem. Not a bad poem, but, very dark. It very clearly shows one aspect of Meng Haoran, which is not the one that is typically emphasized. So not the happy stroller of the woods, happy in not being in office. It's the frustrated scholar official who has failed and who is really frustrated at his failure.